Huisentruit with the news anchor who never been to work, you know? Just watch again, it'll blow your mind. Nah, that's the same shit they pulled the Jeffrey Epstein shit, nah. That last video, that shit blew my mind. I don't want nothing to blow my mind for real, you know what I'm saying?
Was already late for work. As a morning news anchor at KIMT in the town of Mason City, Iowa, her days would usually begin at 3:30 a.m., when she would arrive at the station to prepare for the 6 a.m. broadcast.
Okay.
The 27-year-old had become something of a local celebrity, as for many, she was the first voice to greet them in the morning with all of the day's news.
One day after my mom's birthday.
Ain't no GG's, nigga. I want to be nice, like they win, like always fucking out of here.
I'm Jodi Huisentruit.
Oh, happy birthday, Jodi's mom.
Happy birthday, Jane. I call her Teddy Bear.
Well, okay.
The only issue was, on this particular morning, Jodi had accidentally slept in.
Okay.
When 4 a.m. passed and Jodi was still absent from the station, her coworker placed a call to her apartment to check in.
Let me figure it out.
Flustered, answered the phone, apologizing profusely that she had overslept and will get to the office soon. She only lived a mile away, so her coworkers had no doubt that she would be there shortly.
Everything sounded normal, like I just woke up. I didn't hear anything out nothing. Amy closed court and dead air by.
Known as a dedicated worker who loved her career, Jodi had never once missed a broadcast. She relished her time on the air, so when she assured her colleagues that she'd be there soon,
try to read most of the comment in your head. Answering too many questions will ruin the reaction. Oh,
they had
you're
no
right,
reason not to believe her. But 6 a.m. came and went, and Jodi was still nowhere to be found. After having another anchor fill in for her for the morning broadcast, her concerned coworkers asked the police to do a wellness check on her home. When they arrived, what they found confirmed their worst fears. In the parking lot, her car was still there. Surrounding it was her high heel, earrings, and hairspray, all scattered.
Oh, she got robbed in that bitch? What?
And her key laying on the ground, slightly bent out of shape. There could be no mistake. These were clear and unmistakable signs of a struggle. Jodi Huisentruit was gone. Surveying the scene, police and those who loved her desperately hoped that she would turn up soon. But as the days turned into weeks, their hopes began to fade. For the next 30 years, Jodi's disappearance would grow into a national story, drawing in hundreds of potential suspects,
not a disappearance,
and leaving behind questions.
I hope I'm not watching this shit and then they haven't figured out nothing.
Days later, would remain unanswered.
Whoever took Jodi knew her schedule, knew where she lived, knew what time she went to work, and was patient enough to wait even after she overslept. Knew her call, and even knew what door she was going.
Alright, there we go. Chapter 1, 30 seconds. Right.
Those first few hours in a kidnapping case can mean the difference between life and death, so the police wasted no time in diving in to try to piece together what they found at the scene. Starting first with where they believed the crime took place, the area around her bright red Mazda Miata. Only steps from her front door, her car was parked in the parking lot of the Key apartment complex in Mason City, Iowa, where she lived. Around it, Jodi's hairdryer, her high-heel shoe, her earrings, hairspray, all littered the surrounding area as if they had been thrown into a violent struggle. Her car key had been slightly bent. Police theorized that Jodi had fit the key into the lock, but was attacked before she could turn it, causing the key to bend in the locking mechanism. Even the car itself showed signs of a struggle, as her side mirror had been shoved backwards towards the car's front bumper, suggesting Jodi might have been thrown against it. Then, just beyond the immediate scene, leading away from the car and into the darkness, were small drag marks pressed in soil, the police's last indication of where she may have gone. Shocked and confused, police could only ask themselves who would do this to a beloved local news anchor. Jodi was a local celebrity. Born and raised in Minnesota, Jodi had always loved journalism and Jodi was a local celebrity.
What the fuck is that? Like, bro, they be having some weird creepy ass.
Jodi had always loved journalism and being on the air.
Joe, I'm not clowning around when I say our show has to come to a close.
After a brief stint as a flight attendant after college, Jodi dove headfirst into building a career in broadcasting.
Why they blocking that nigga face?
In local news outlets, then working her way up to a news anchor. By the time she took her anchoring job in Mason City, Iowa, she'd been paying her dues and putting in the work to be well on her way to bigger and better markets. So why now, when she was on the cusp of becoming something bigger? To answer that question, the only thing they could do was turn to the evidence. Police scanned the area, dusting for fingerprints and other DNA evidence, which turned up only a singular hair and a partial palm print on a pole near the car. Despite the small amount of DNA evidence, the physical evidence around the scene seemed to be telling a clear story, that there had been a struggle here. Someone had
I ain't gonna lie, Chad, you know what game we haven't been on in a minute, nigga? Gartic phone. That shit was fun as hell. I should have hopped on that shit right before, you know what I'm saying, everything was done. Like, Gartic phone, I'm interrupting the reaction, my bad.
True, surely someone had to have seen or heard something. Sure enough, according to police, at least one resident had reported hearing a woman scream in the middle of the night, but did not contact police or even look outside when the incident occurred. One strange detail, though, had been repeated by a few separate sources. Empty beer cans, finished and discarded in the parking lot only steps away from the dumpster, as if someone had been lingering there, drinking a beer. Although seemingly harmless, what made the fact more unsettling was the vantage point. Anyone sitting or standing in that exact spot would have a clear, unobstructed view straight into Jodi's apartment window. Did Jodi have a stalker? It certainly was a risk of the profession, as female news anchors often experienced unwanted attention from those who have developed unhealthy fixations to the person they so often saw on their screen.
Why sound like a bot who reading this shit, gang?
His full name, phone number, and home address was listed in the local yellow pages.
It would be wild shit if you had a stalker, though.
They knew exactly how to do it. Even in the days leading up to her disappearance, Jodi had mentioned to friends and colleagues about a series of unsettling phone calls, describing them as nasty and naughty. They came so often and were intrusive enough that she was even planning on changing her phone number soon to make them stop. This wasn't her only concern. At one point, she had even reported to police that she believed she was being followed by a white truck, although the information led nowhere and the report did not result in any concrete action. To take matters in her own hands, she began enrolling in self-defense classes, confiding in her teacher that she was taking them out of concerns for her own safety. But how did the stalker angle hold
Nigga, what is self-defense classes though? Karate? I'm not gonna joke around with this shit.
For someone to have taken
I don't know how
when
serious
and
this
where
situation
they did,
is.
they needed to have detailed knowledge of her routine, including her uncommon start time of 3 a.m. For someone who may have been watching her every move, or even just understood the ins and outs of the industry, this information wouldn't be hard to find. But in this case, timing was everything. The distance between her front door and her vehicle was 12 steps. This would have taken less than 30 seconds to cross. For someone to attack her in this minuscule time frame meant that whoever it was, they had to have been exactly in the right place at the right time. Although, there is one detail that complicates this whole theory. Recall that on this particular morning, Jodi was late, a whole hour behind schedule. Would a stalker have really waited the extra hour lingering by the door, risking exposing himself or seeming suspicious, just in hopes of catching her? Would they have not just postponed their attack?
They could have watched from the window or some shit.
Schedule would be the same tomorrow.
He knew how she was moving.
And what about the apartment itself? It seemed that the attack took place after she had left her building, right as she was getting into her vehicle. So can her apartment shed any light on the situation? As investigators searched her home, they found very little out of the ordinary. It was a home fit for a single woman in her mid-20s, small and somewhat messy, but understandable for a person who devotes most of their time to their career. Although, a few items did seem suspicious. In Jodi's bathroom, investigators noted that the toilet seat was left up. The implication, of course, was hard to ignore. It raised the possibility that a man had been inside her apartment, whether the night before she disappeared or the morning of. Someone she may have known and trusted enough to let through the front door. And if that was the case, instead of a stranger or a stalker, someone inside her home suggested something far more personal and potentially far more dangerous. Investigators also found 2 wine glasses in Jodi's kitchen. Now, on its own, that might not seem like much, but Jodi lived alone, and the presence of 2 wine glasses in the raised toilet seat suggested that she may have had company. Although investigators couldn't say with certainty whether both glasses had been used on the same night or on 2 entirely separate occasions. Some offered the explanation that Jodi sometimes used wine glasses to drink water when her other glasses were dirty or put away, which was entirely plausible for someone who kept odd hours and rarely had time to stay on top of household chores. But the question of whether someone had been there with her that night, sharing a drink, sitting across from her in that small apartment, remained open. With Jodi's home, car, and the surrounding area thoroughly searched, investigators found themselves at a standstill. The physical evidence could only take them so far. What they needed now was a clear understanding of who Jodi was and what had happened in the hours leading up to her disappearance.
Wait, so if this was at the 90s, right? There's no cameras at all. So
she been with? Where had she gone? And who was the last person to see her before she vanished? As it turned out, they wouldn't have to wait long for an answer.
What y'all want me to do? Just watch and stay watching the ads and shit. Bro, this shit pissed me off.
Like extraordinary luck, a middle-aged man
Yo, blow my mind over it, bro. I'm trying to figure out something.
Only hours after Jodi had been reported missing.
Okay.
The man said that he was the last person to have seen Jodi alive. The man was John Van Cise, a former seed salesman who had lived in Mason City for years, and a close friend of Jodi's despite being 22 years older than her.
Oh, so she's
despite
confirmed
the age
dead.
gap, the two spent a surprising amount of time together and seemed to know each other very well. He was, as far as anyone could tell, a fixture in her life. In fact, in interviews after Jodi's disappearance, Van Cise defined their relationship.
Jodi and I became very good friends, nothing more, nothing less. We did things as a group with other people, and we just got to know each other a lot, and we liked each other. We had a lot of fun together, like a father-daughter situation. She just meant so much to me, and we had so much fun together, her and her friends. And
Solid.
I even named my boat after her because just because she's Jodi, and she's been such a big part of my life here lately, and she just makes me feel so good and feel great about things.
Some have characterized this fondness for Jodi as Van Cise having a romantic interest in her, an idea that he has thoroughly denied. But to make more sense
that
of
don't
where
matter,
Van Cise
gang.
fits into
Let's
Jodi's
move.
story, we need to go back and reconstruct the final days before Jodi vanished. Just the weekend before she disappeared, Van Cise and Jodi, along with some other friends, had gone water skiing in Iowa City, one of their many frequent outings. They had used Van Cise's boat, which he had informally named after Jodi. He later said that this was his way of showing admiration for her and that she was flattered by the gesture. In later interviews, friends who had also attended the weekend trip recalled that nothing seemed strange between Jodi and John.
See, Jodi and I slept in the same room. It was fun. It was, there were a fun group of people there, and it was a pretty typical weekend. We just were silly and water skiing and just hanging out.
The trip was cut short by bad weather, and by early Sunday evening, Jodi was back home in Mason City. This day was also the last day that she wrote in a journal that she kept, writing that she had a great time over the weekend, but that she was fed up professionally. It's difficult finding a new job, and I'm confused about agent and what to do. What's important about this last entry is that it shows no mention or hint that she was troubled, that she was in fear, or that anyone was stalking her. The next day, Monday, June 26th, the day before she disappeared, started like any other. She went into work in the morning, but was allowed to leave early at 9 a.m. to attend a charity golf tournament. Like many for Jodi, it was going to be a long, social day, but the event was actually cut short because of rain, at which point the attendees migrated into the golf clubhouse and socialized while they waited out the rain. At some point in the afternoon, Jodi went home to change before heading back out again, this time to the Mason City Country Club for dinner. This is where, as mentioned previously, people recall Jodi saying that she'd been getting strange calls and was planning on changing her phone number. Jodi left the dinner at around 8 p.m., and from this point on, the timeline begins to narrow, and the uncertainty begins to grow. According to John Van Cise, Jodi came over to his house after leaving the country club. It's unclear when the two made this plan, but Van Cise says that they watched a videotape of a surprise birthday party he had helped organize for her just weeks earlier. After that, he says, she left and went home. Now, nobody except Van Cise can confirm that Jodi was actually at his place. What we do know, though, is that Jodi called a friend at 8:24 p.m. from her home phone. This little window of time is the first moment where the timeline begins to raise questions. Jodi would have had to leave the dinner at around 8 p.m., drive to John's house, spend time watching the tape, which was allegedly 18 minutes long, then make it back home in time to place a call at 8:24. Others suggest that perhaps Jodi had come home after the dinner, made the 8:24 call, then left again to watch the video at John's house. Regardless, this makes the timeline a little tight, and from that point forward, things only become more uncertain. At this point, the only—
So that nigga nice, with advice. That nigga might be a culprit. He might be a little culprit.
way to
I don't know
understand
though.
what might have happened
I'm
is
assuming.
to look at what people around the apartment complex reported hearing and seeing that night and into the early hours of the next morning.
Okay.
A lot of these details come from Beth Bednar's book, Dead Air, which compiles witness statements, interviews, and tips gathered over the years. It's important to note that not all of these accounts are confirmed, and some come from sources that remain anonymous. But taken together, they give a sense of what may have been happening around Jodi's apartment in the hours leading up to her disappearance. One woman, who lived directly across the hall from Jodi, said that the night before Jodi's disappearance, she heard a man outside of Jodi's door. He was pounding on it, yelling, "Open the door, Jodi, I know you're in there." Jodi never answered, and after a few minutes, the man stopped and left. The next morning, the same neighbor said that she was woken up by a scream. She described hearing a loud thud or slamming sound, followed by a woman yelling something like, "No, John, don't." The name wasn't clear. It could have been John or Don or Sean or anything similar, and the sound stopped almost as quickly as it started. Other people in the area reported hearing something too. One man, Keith Walsh, later said that he heard a woman yelling, "Help, help." Another resident, Betty Walsh, also heard the noise, but she thought it sounded more like someone reacting surprised instead of horrified, maybe playing around. A man named Randy Linderman said that as he was driving by the apartment complex that morning, he noticed a white van parked near Jodi's building. He slowed down because the van's parking lights were on, and at first he thought it might be a police vehicle. He later described it as a mid-1980s Ford Econoline van. That van was never identified, and over time, it's become one of the most popular details in the case. According to the book, Linderman wasn't the only person to mention a white van. One neighbor even said that sometime in the week leading up to the disappearance, he saw two men sitting in a white van in the same parking lot early in the morning. She claims this made her uncomfortable enough to not get out of her car and ended up leaving. Individually, none of these accounts give a clear answer. Some are vague, inconsistent, and some may have nothing to do with what happened at all, but they all place something happening in and around that parking lot in the early hours of June 27th. And yet, despite all of it, no one ever claimed to actually witness any abduction take place, which meant that investigators had to shift their focus back to the people closest to her, and one name in particular kept coming up: John Van Cise.
Yeah, they heard. So I can't even talk to. I can't. But they heard John Van Cise. They talking about no John Doe. Y'all already heard that, bro. Don't tell me what I think that's gonna happen, gang.
A viable suspect to many. After all, he was one of Jodi's closest friends. He had spent the final weekend of her life with her. And most significantly, he was the one who walked up to police that morning and told them that he was the last person to see her alive. So what is his alibi the morning that Jodi was abducted? Since it was 4 a.m. and John didn't live with anyone, he would have been in bed. But again, no one but him can confirm that. There is someone, though, who can give Van Cise an alibi later that morning. A woman named LaDonna Woodford, a very close friend of John's, had said that she had called him around 6 to 6:30 a.m. that morning.
I was at my home, and I called him between 6 and 6:30, and he picked up the phone, but he was like, hello? And I was like, John, did I wake you up? And he goes, yeah, what time is it, you know? And because I knew John so well, and we were such close friends.
Keyword.
I could tell he was sleeping. And I said, John, hey, it's LaDonna. I just want to know if you're up for working out. And he's like, oh, I don't know. I'm really tired, but I should do this. And I was like, okay, well, you don't have to do this. But I said, if you want to do it, I said, I will come in and we'll work out for an hour or so. And he said, well, because I haven't gotten up and I haven't had my coffee, he said, why don't you just meet me by my house? And I was like, okay, great.
She knows he must have been at home when he picked up her call because they didn't have cell phones. She also claims that she didn't notice Van Cise acting strangely or anxiously, although she does remember him being very tired.
I said, what did you do last night? I said, well, why are you so, kind of sleepy, you know? And he said, well, Jodi came over last night and we watched this video of her party. And I said, well, how did that go? And he said, oh, it was so funny. He said it was so fun to watch her. She was dancing on the tables and she was having a good time. And that was pretty much it.
Let's get someone
It
now.
wasn't anything more, anything less.
If her account is accurate, which it likely is since she told the same story under oath in 1997 in front of a grand jury, it gives Van Cise roughly 90 minutes between the time of the abduction and the time she reached him. 90 minutes to abduct someone, get rid of their body, then be back home, and walk with a friend who notices nothing suspicious about his behavior. The timeline is tight, but not impossible. Police, at least, weren't convinced.
Keyword, she said word. I think we getting somewhere. I think that nigga's a nigga.
On with investigating John Van Cise, speaking to friends and family about his relationship with Jodi and his whereabouts in the days leading up to her disappearance. Considering his close connection to her, as well as his claim to have been the last person to see her alive, police decided to question Van Cise, even administering him a polygraph test on 2 separate occasions, both of which he claimed to have passed with flying colors. John's self-assurance in his own innocence even led him to do multiple interviews for the media in the days following her disappearance. However, many observers pointed out a curious detail. On several occasions, he chooses to refer to Jodi in the past tense.
Saw want to be out having fun, because that was her.
It's her.
It is.
Everything is.
It is her.
But it wasn't just the past tense.
That's what I'm saying. I already knew it. I already knew it, like, earlier.
The more people talked, the more a picture started to emerge. Jodi's coworkers, her friends, some of the people who knew her best, began describing what they had observed about her relationship with Van Cise. Amy Coons, the producer who had been the last person to speak to Jodi on the phone that morning, said that she knew how much fun they had together, but she also knew that Van Cise wanted Jodi to be more than just a friend.
She wasn't dating anyone exclusively. She had an older friend. He was about 50 years old, John Van Cise. I knew how much fun they had together, and I knew that he wanted her as more than just a friend. And Jodi had
Is that your opinion,
that,
or that's facts though?
We talked it over and we're just friends, and John knows that, and we still hang out and still have fun together.
Jodi's own sister, Joanne, still questions the relationship Jodi had with John Van Cise, stating that she suspected he wanted more of a relationship with her. Now think about what that looks like from the outside. A recently divorced man in his late 40s, a woman 22 years younger than him, one of the most visible people in town, who had been his close companion for 7 months. He had organized her birthday party, he had named his boat after her, and by multiple accounts, his feelings for her went further than what she was willing to meet. So what happens when he gets told no, that the young woman he had been pining for does not reciprocate his feelings? What then? So let's say John Van Cise wanted to kill her. Jodi spurned his advances, he got angry, and decided that she would pay with her life. Why choose that specific day? Why choose that place? According to him, Jodi had been in his apartment the night before, so if he was planning on killing her, why not kill her then, in the privacy of his own 4 walls? Why choose instead to wait outside her apartment to carry out the deed in public, running the risk of being seen? John actually used to live in the same apartment building as Jodi, and surely at least a few tenants would still recognize him. Not only this, but in crimes of passion, there is significantly less thought or planning that goes into the crime.
Okay.
So if John had really entered a murderous rage, was it so severe that he could hide by her apartment in the...
Already people going on here. There's no other suspects. It's either that they don't figure out and still mystery today, or it's just like, oh, shit, that nigga really did that bitch.
Early hours of the morning, and waiting an extra hour longer than usual without losing his nerve. Although none of the logistics seemed to be lining up, and there was no hard evidence tying him to the scene, John Van Cise remained the most talked about suspect in the case. Police had acknowledged that he was a person of interest early on, yet did not share any details regarding their investigation of him. In 2017, though, it was revealed that he was forced to provide his fingerprints and palm prints to Iowa police. That same month, police also obtained a warrant to access GPS data from 2 vehicles connected to him. This means that in 2017, police were still investigating Van Cise to obtain his prints and see where his vehicles had been. It would seem like police still suspected Van Cise of something, although the exact reason that these orders were carried out has not been made public by police. For the next few decades, John's relationship with Jodi became the topic of extensive debate on every platform imaginable. His life and choices were scrutinized from every angle, until he eventually stopped engaging with the media altogether. It was only decades later, in an exclusive interview, that Van Cise revealed that during the time that he was friends with Jodi, including the time of her disappearance, he was actually dating another woman. If he was already in a relationship, it cast serious doubt on the idea that he was pursuing another one with Jodi. This, along with LaDonna Woodford's testimony under oath that she'd been with Van Cise that morning and noticed nothing unusual, makes it harder to argue that he was involved in Jodi's disappearance.
Oh yeah, chapter 4, Tony Jackson. So we just talk about a nigga for no reason. You need to get your 30 minutes in, I guess.
Involved in Jodi's abduction, who was? In a case that has drawn decades of scrutiny and speculation, suspects have come and gone, but few have emerged as prominently or as controversially as convicted criminal Tony Jackson. Tony Jackson was well known to police in the Minneapolis area and had been convicted and sentenced in multiple violent sexual assaults, with a history of stalking some of his victims. So this was a convicted criminal, but what does he have to do with Jodi's disappearance?
Yeah,
well, Tony also had an interest in broadcasting. Although he was a star athlete, he also hosted 2 talk shows during his time in college and lived in Mason City, just a few minutes from Jodi's apartment when she was abducted. Multiple witnesses had even reported that Tony might have actually crossed paths with Jodi not long before she went missing. An anonymous former friend of Jackson's said that Jackson had taken him to a bar once, specifically because he knew that Jodi would frequent it.
That individual tells me that Jackson reached out to him and said, hey, let's go to the Southbridge Lounge. And he says, why do we want to go there? And he tells him, but Jodi Huisentruit hangs out there. Oh, yeah, so, okay. Well, then Jackson comes over to his place. And
I know you know that nigga's schedule. Okay.
Casual business attire. He has a briefcase with him. And then the individual says to him, well, what's the briefcase? It's nothing. There's nothing in there. Shows him there's actually nothing in there. So they walk to the Southbridge Lounge. He didn't live that far away. They go in, and as soon as they enter the bar, they see Jodi Huisentruit sitting at the bar, and Jackson walks right up to her and starts engaging her in a conversation.
Okay. What's even more concerning is that only days earlier, Jackson had gone through a messy breakup with his girlfriend, a woman who many have pointed out looked strikingly similar to Jodi. The night before Jodi's disappearance, Tony had left his job early, stating he needed to go to the emergency room for a leg injury, for which he received crutches. In the days following, he made 2 unplanned visits to his parole officer on his crutches, something that was extremely out of character for him. Many wondered whether these visits were part of an effort to create an alibi to be seen with the crutches, using his leg injury as a means to disqualify him as a suspect. As for his real alibi on the day of Jodi's disappearance, he has none. Tony arrived at work at 4 p.m. on June 27th, working for only an hour, meaning that no one could confirm his whereabouts on the day Jodi disappeared until 11 hours after she was gone.
Why is he a prime suspect? Like, I need to know.
There have been multiple vehicles of interest. The strange white van parked in the parking lot the morning of, the white truck that had been following her weeks earlier. But not many people speak of the car that witnesses had seen peel out of the Key Apartments parking lot at around the time of her disappearance, driving at a high speed down the street. Though the make of the car was not confirmed, Tony Jackson had bought a car only a day before Jodi went missing, only to return it 2 weeks later after a $7,000 check to pay for it had bounced. At that point, he had already put 548 miles on it, an unexpectedly high number for someone living in a small town like Mason City, Iowa. So investigators started looking at where those miles could have gone. What they hoped was the answer actually came years later, when Tony was already in jail for the Twin City assaults he had been convicted of years earlier. His former cellmate, a man who was in for multiple drunk driving charges, began to con Tony, acting as though he had committed the same violent crimes to try to get Tony to open up about what he'd done. Falling for his ruse, Tony had allegedly confessed to him that he had abducted an anchor woman and killed her, although he did not specify who. When probed further, he shared a section of a rap he wrote, which went like this: "She's a stiffin' around Tiffin, in a pilage of silage, in a bylow low below, off a highway by the grave road." With these lyrics, investigators had a lead. The I-team at WCCO took matters into their own hands, and found that Tiffin is a small town around 2.5 hours from Mason City. According to Tony's cell phone records, he had been in the area around a
nigga drove 2 hours to get the body out?
Month before he was arrested for a string of assaults. With the line, "in a pilage of silage off a highway by the grave road," investigators drove down the town's only highway, looking for a cemetery that could be what the grave road was referring to. Sure enough, they found one, with a silo not far away. Hopeful by the discovery, the I-team paid out of pocket to have police cadaver dogs search the area around it, in the presence of both Tiffin police and Mason City police. Sure enough, 2 of the 3 dogs independently identified the scent of human remains inside the silo, but upon digging out the area, no human remains were found. Again, without the presence of a body and no concrete evidence to link him to the crime, the investigation into Tony Jackson hit a dead end.
That nigga did that shit. Huh? This is another nigga?
Beyond these 2 central figures, John Van Cise and Tony Jackson, the list of credible suspects grows increasingly thin. Most potential persons of interest beyond these 2 are linked to the case more by speculation rather than substance. The Mason City Police Department have also been notoriously tight-lipped regarding the details of their investigation, so most of these individuals have not been officially acknowledged as persons of interest. Okay. One of the most popular of which is a man named Dustin Honkin. Starting out dealing marijuana and later cocaine, Dustin Honkin quickly rose through the ranks after discovering a talent for chemistry, transitioning into a methamphetamine supplier in his very own drug operation. As his operation grew and his clientele became larger and more addicted, he enlisted the help of a few dealers to move more product and make more money. Terry DeGoo and Greg Nicholson.
Who the fuck are they?
Terry's former girlfriend, Angela Johnson, would soon become involved with Dustin, and now with more clients, more money, and a growing empire, Dustin Honkin had felt unstoppable. That is, until it all came crashing down. After cutting a deal with the police, one of his dealers ratted him out, leading to Dustin's eventual arrest for the manufacturing and dealing of methamphetamines. That was until the state's only cooperative witness, the dealer Greg Nicholson, disappeared from Mason City along with his girlfriend and her 2 young daughters, 6-year-old Candy and 10-year-old Amber. It was only years later, when Dustin's former girlfriend Angela Johnson shared the story from jail, that the police finally found out what happened to them. According to her, in 1993, Dustin had murdered the entire family, Greg, his girlfriend, and her 2 young children. With this confession from Angela now hanging over Dustin's neck, he was arrested and tried, eventually being handed a death sentence for the murder of Greg and his family, as well as Dustin's other dealer, Terry DeGue. He was executed by lethal injection on July 17th, and the other dealer eventually being handed a death sentence for the murder of Greg and his family, as well as Dustin's other dealer, Terry DeGue. He was executed by lethal injection. He was arrested and tried, eventually being handed a death sentence for the murder of Greg and his family, as well as Dustin's other dealer, Terry DeGue.
What? He killed all 2 of them niggas? The fuck? Why the fuck was he moving like that? What the fuck did it have anything to do with
He was executed by lethal injection on July 17th, 2020. But what did Dustin Honkin have to do with Jodi's abduction? Some have speculated a connection through Mason City, Iowa, part of Honkin's drug network, in the same town where Greg Nicholson and his family lived before they were abducted and murdered. In a town that small, a crime of that scale wouldn't have gone unnoticed.
Yes.
Given her role as a news anchor, some believe Jodi may have been looking into the case and possibly uncovered something she wasn't meant to find. Suspicion deepened when it was noted that Honkin's girlfriend and accomplice, Angela Johnson, had once worked at the golf club Jodi visited the day before she disappeared, placing a known murderer uncomfortably close to Jodi's final known movements. That theory, however, begins to unravel under scrutiny. Angela had left her job at the golf club 3 months before Jodi vanished.
That's why I hate these videos!
Confirmed that she was no longer employed there at the time. Angela herself later wrote to a member of the Find Jodi team, stating she had no knowledge of Jodi's disappearance. Meanwhile, Jodi's colleagues and supervisors said that there was no evidence that she'd been investigating a drug-related story, something outside of the scope of her work. And perhaps most tellingly, if Honkin had known anything about Jodi's fate, many argue he would have used that information to his advantage. Facing execution, any credible lead in a high-profile cold case could have bought him more time or leverage. The fact that he never did suggests a simpler explanation, that he had nothing to offer. For years, Dustin Honkin has been among the names repeatedly linked to the case, woven into a long line of suspected individuals. Yet there is no concrete evidence tying him to Jodi's disappearance.
Nah, niggas still don't know.
As time went on, new leads seemed to appear and dry up equally as fast. Apart from these main persons of interest, multiple other people have been tied to the case by journalists and internet sleuths alike, but very few have any real evidence to back them up. All investigators have left now is speculation. Some have even begun to turn their gaze inward, towards those tasked with solving the case. Whispers of a cover-up within the Mason City Police Department had taken hold, when in late 2018, a former Mason City police officer suggested that police officials from within the department were potentially involved in Jodi's disappearance.
I received information from multiple sources that a couple of my lieutenants were potentially involved in the murder and abduction of Jodi.
Although like so much else in the case, very little came of it. The disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit has haunted Mason City for over 3 decades now. In the darkness of the early morning, a pillar of the community and a deeply beloved woman vanished in the blink of an eye. Since then, the same question has cast a shadow on the town and occupied the minds of everyone who knew her. What happened to Jodi Huisentruit? But while the case has grown older, the determination to find answers has never faded. Jodi's friends, family, colleagues, and supporters refuse to let her story disappear into history. They've created FindJodi.com, a non-profit organization devoted to preserving Jodi's memory and advancing the search for the truth. If you have any information regarding Jodi's disappearance, please contact the Mason City Police Department or send an anonymous tip at FindJodi.com. Until the truth is known, all that's left to do is to wait, to wonder, and to remember.
Man, bro, R.I.P. Jodi, gang. Damn. What's the best sort of potassium? I don't know, nigga. That's a random ass question. Why would I? Nigga? I'm not even Professor Stola mode, nigga. I wouldn't know that. That's not something I would know. I ain't gonna lie, chat, bro. I hate those type of videos, bro.
It's only magic. for staying